episode of NCIS Reports from the Field, which this episode is partially brought to you by the generous donations of Marie Burris, Dorothy Arnold, and retired Special Agent Vic McPherson, and also the Naval Criminal Investigative Service Association, which has been great in assisting with this history project to bring great guests to the program. Today's guest is Mark Clookie, who became the 4th Civilian Director for the Naval Criminal Investigative Service on February 14th, 2010, following his appointment to the position by Ray Mabus, the Secretary of the Navy. Mr. Clookie began his career with the Naval Investigative Service in March of 1982 at the NCIS. I should always say that, the NIS Resident Agency, NIS Resident Agency in Newport, Rhode Island. And in June 1987, Special Agent Clookie began a series of tours in Washington, D.C. area to include desk officer at NIS headquarters, NIS representative to the Office of Naval Inspector General, and assistant special agent in charge of the Washington Fraud Unit. In July 1993 until December of 1995, Special Agent Clookie served as the resident agent in charge of the NCIS resident agency in Bahrain. After his tour in Bahrain, he was promoted to GS-14 and transferred to the NCIS Northeast Field Office, where he served as the assistant special agent in charge from December 1995 until June of 1998. In July of 1998, Special Agent Clookie moved his family to Okinawa, Japan, where he served as a resident agent in charge until August of 2000. He then returned to the United States to assume duties as the head of agent control and personnel operations, NCIS headquarters in Washington, D.C. In August of 2001, Special Agent Clookie was promoted to GS-15 and reported to the Pentagon as the Chief Joint Staff Support Branch, Joint Counterintelligence Center, J2CI. Following the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001, he assumed duties as the Special Agent in charge of the NCIS Middle East Field Office, headquartered in Manama, Bahrain. From there, he directed all counterintelligence, counterterrorism, and criminal investigative operations throughout the Middle East, East Africa, and Southwest Asia. His primary focus was direct support to the Navy and Marine Corps Forces Central Command and the Navy's Fifth Fleet. After more than 2 years in the Middle East directing NCIS Global War on Terrorism missions, Clookie returned to NCIS headquarters, where he served as the executive assistant to the Deputy Director for Management and Administration. He also led NCIS modernization initiatives and was later promoted to Assistant Director for Human Resources. In October 2007, Clookie was promoted to Senior Executive Service and assumed responsibilities as the Executive Assistant Director for Middle East and Pacific Operations. In April 2009, Clookie was reassigned as the Executive Assistant Director for Combating Terrorism. In 2013, after retiring as Director, NCIS Mark Clookie, after retiring as Director, NCIS, Clookie became the Vice President of Investigations and Law Enforcement Development for the human rights organization International Justice Mission. And in 2018, Director Clookie founded PreventionNow.org, preventing human trafficking around the world. Director Clookie, it's great to have you on the program today.
Thank you, Lee. And thank you. I'm going to take a moment just to thank you for all you're doing to capture our history. It's a great agency. I couldn't have imagined a better career. I'm so thrilled that folks like yourself are taking the time to look back and let us all remember the past and also learn from the past. So thank you so much for what you're doing.
Well, thank you for saying that, sir. You know, I got to tell you, I love this organization and I love the people in this organization. We're a family. And I love capturing the history because I think there's a significant history to find, to see about this organization from the days of the ONI through NIS to NCIS. One of the greatest organizations ever made, or developed in the Department of Navy for the U.S. government. So it's a pleasure to have you on the program, and exciting to have you on the program because you're part of our what I like call the Director Series. So because nobody knows how hard it is to lead an organization except the guy on the top who has to make all the decisions. So I'm excited to hear about your background. So can we talk a little bit about your background, how you got started, where you came, where you're from? Tell me a little bit about your family, and then how you got all the way up to NCIS.
Sure, happy to. Well, I come from a military family. My father was a Coast Guard officer. When I was born in Two Rivers, Wisconsin, he was the group commander for Coast Guard, I guess a region there in the Great Lakes, Lake Michigan specifically. And shortly thereafter, he retired, but my eldest brother, Woody, who later became an NCIS analyst, he went into the Coast Guard, and he ultimately retired from the Coast Guard. Wayne, our middle brother, who also became an NCIS agent, found his way into the Navy towards the end of the Vietnam War, and then later joined NIS, obviously. So it seemed in my DNA that I was either going to be in the military or in law enforcement, one way or the other. And actually, Woody's service in the Coast Guard was in the Coast Guard Investigative Service. So not only my brothers, but my father, of course, all had an influence on shaping me in where I think I would ultimately end up. And it turned out to be the beautiful synergy of law enforcement and military in the NCIS. So I'm so thankful for that.
Wow. So you grew up in Wisconsin, or where did you kind of grow up?
Well, I was born in Wisconsin, Two Rivers. I was only there for a few years, and then we relocated to Anne Arundel County in Maryland, about halfway between Baltimore and Annapolis. And that's really where my formative years were spent in high school and ultimately the University of Maryland, College Park.
Oh, very nice. You're a Terrapin.
I am.
Very good. So now you started off your law enforcement career there in Maryland, right?
I did, yeah. Shortly after graduating from the University of Maryland with a degree in criminology and minor in law enforcement, I was hired by the Annapolis City Police Department. Annapolis City didn't quite have a large enough force to warrant its own academy, so I had the privilege and quite interesting experience of going through the Baltimore City Police Academy, which at times was a bit of a challenge and a very different environment, and made me appreciate once I was fully ensconced in the Annapolis PD.
So the Baltimore Police Academy, was that more like a military training regime?
It was to a point, but I think the thing that probably stands out the most was how dependent the force was on the academy itself. I remember one day sitting in class, and there were a series of riots ongoing in the city. The colonel in charge came into our classroom. Of course, we had not yet graduated, and said, everybody load up. You're going to be issued riot gear, and we're going to put you on a bus and send you out to work the riots. And so we all did, right up until the point where myself and two colleagues from Annapolis were held back, and they said, from a legal standpoint, we probably really can't put you out on the street. So we just barely missed that fun. But
oh my goodness,
it was a good academy, and we learned a great deal. So it was all good.
That's amazing. So you started off with Annapolis Police. Any great stories from Annapolis, your Annapolis days?
Yeah, I think actually, when I was on the stage graduating from the Baltimore City Police Academy, our chief from Annapolis was there. He congratulated me, of course, and then said, see me right after. I've got a special assignment for you, which set me back on my heels a bit. And he said, we're going to put you undercover, and you're going to do some counter narcotics work for us. And I thought, wow, already I'm promoted to detective. Little did I know I was truly going to be undercover myself, not running operatives. But anyhow, it was a good time. So I did that for the first 6 months of my time with Annapolis. And all this time, I should say that I had already applied to become an NIS agent, and was pushed back. The person I had my initial screening with said, we really want you to get some real life experience. So I shrugged my shoulders. I said, well, how's that going to happen? He said, well, go be a cop. So that's why I joined Annapolis PD. He said, come back in 2 years and we'll consider you. So almost 2 years to the day, I went back, saw the same screening officer, And he said, "All right, we'll give you a shot. Your brother's doing okay, so we'll give you a shot."
That's right, because you're from a family of NIS agents and NIS analysts, right?
That's right. Yeah, Wayne, our middle brother, was an NIS agent at that point,
Mm-hmm.
and Woody was a Coast Guard investigative service, but he later became an NCIS analyst.
Oh, that's interesting. So you have the CGIS angle with your dad and your brother, and then of course Wayne, who I worked for in San Diego years ago, a
That's
great
right.
boss. What a good family to have to kind of influence your decisions, right?
Yeah, absolutely. A little bit of pressure growing up, of course, to have to live up to the expectations of almost, it was almost like having three dads because my two brothers are a fair amount older than I am.
Yeah.
But I have to say, because I'm hopeful they'll watch this, they were a huge influence on me in every positive regard.
So what were your conversations with like Wayne before you applied for an NIS position?
He was very encouraging,
Good.
and I saw that love he had for NIS.
Yeah.
He really seemed to thoroughly enjoy his work,
Mm-hmm.
and Woody likewise in CGIS. So for me, it was just a no-brainer that I've got to join that organization because they're doing something meaningful, but it looks like they're having fun doing it too. So why
Sure.
not? Yeah, absolutely.
Wow, what an experience. So after Anne Arundel, or excuse me, after Annapolis, can you tell me what you did from there?
Yeah, and that's really I left Annapolis PD
Mm-hmm.
to go off to basic training for NCIS or NIS at the time. So I reported initially to the Newport field office, Newport, Rhode Island. Wasn't one of my choices, of course. Wayne had encouraged me to bid on places where I get great experience, like Pendleton, Norfolk, San Diego, or Lejeune. So I put in for those offices, and of course, I get Newport, Rhode Island. I said, I didn't even know there was Navy in Newport, Rhode Island. Why would there be an NCIS or an NIS office? So,
That's good.
but it was good, and it was a great first job. My first, I think back then we called them SACs.
Mm-hmm.
Special agent in charge was Tom Neary, a tremendous gentleman. Had great regard for him. Soon thereafter, it was Bob Sotak, and then Kent Walker. So I really had some really good experience and great leadership there in Newport as a young agent.
You know, one thing I always like to ask people who have joined the organization, one of the things I like to ask them is one, your screening board, how did that go? And because those were always kind of interesting, and also the training academy. You obviously went to one of the academies at Washington D.C., right?
I was the split experiment. So we did the academy there in Suitland at the old headquarters, right?
Right. Right.
But then there was a period of time. I want to say like the last 4 or 5 weeks was down at FLETC.
Mm-hmm.
So most of our classroom time, if you will, was at Suitland and then down to FLETC for driver training, firearms, unarmed self-defense, that sort of thing.
Good stuff. Now, before that, you had to go through the screening board, like all new agents have to go through, and it's always an interesting experience going through a screening board back in those days.
Oh my, it was nerve-wracking. I was so nervous, and of course, my brothers didn't help any. They were sure to tell me just how difficult the process would be. And the one thing I remember most was, these three gentlemen lined up across from me at a table. And then, of course, I'm sitting in that single chair. It felt more like an interrogation than an interview. We went through about an hour's worth of questions. And they said, all right, well, let's take a break. All right. I didn't know quite what that meant. I wasn't sure what the format was going to be. And you remember those old wooden, heavy Navy chairs, right?
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. We all do, I think, from that era. I had perspired so badly that when I stood up, the chair came with me. It had stuck to my back. That's how nervous I was. So in any event, and I think they got a chuckle out of that. So they gave me about a 15-minute break, and I came back, and it was a much more relaxed second half, if you will, after the intermission. And but it was good. It made me think. It made me worry. And of course, they don't tell you what the results are at that time, so you go away just thinking you've bombed it. And I knew the pressure was on because Dad and the two brothers were expecting good things, and I had to perform. So yeah.
So when did you find out that you've been hired?
I think it was just a couple of weeks later, and a letter came in the mail, and my wife, Mona, who I love dearly, and she has been a huge part of my NCIS career.
Sure.
She said, well, I want to open it. So she opened it, and I could tell from the smile on her face that it was good news. And, it said, congratulations, report to Newport, Rhode Island, which is when I shrugged my shoulders. I said, really? Newport, Rhode Island? So, but, it turned out great. And even, I got to say, Lee, even those jobs and we all had those assignments, right? Where we weren't like, this isn't where I wanted to go. This isn't what I wanted to do.
Sure.
But ultimately you made the best of it, and it turned out to be good, whether it was because you made some really close friends or you learned some wonderful lessons. It just seems like everywhere you go, there's some good to be, received from it.
Yeah, I think back in those days, and maybe they do it a little bit differently these days. They still do it to some extent. That first office kind of takes you out of your comfort zone. They put you in a place because they want to see you operate with something that's just not comfortable. I was taken from Alabama and put into California, which ultimately was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. So I'm sure it's kind of a similar experience for you.
It was, yes, absolutely. Not only on a professional level, but on a personal level. Mm-hmm. My wife, Mona, had never moved outside of Maryland. She grew up there, went to school there, worked there. We married there. Of course, she was married to me when we were shortly after I joined the Annapolis Police Department. So that was her life. And for us then to be moved to Newport, Rhode Island was a bit of a shock, more for her than me, coming from a military family.
Sure.
But it required us to work together as a family, and I think it made our marriage bond all the stronger. But from a professional level, I found that NIS was very much, and it still is, I believe, NCIS, an organization that makes you think on your feet. And you don't necessarily have all the tools you absolutely need when you're first assigned to a task. I'll never forget, two occasions. One is out of Newport, we would support the protective service details down in New York City.
Sure.
And one occasion I was sent down there. Had never driven in New York City, didn't know anything about it, and of course the detail leader is putting out assignments. He says, "You're going to drive the limousine," and I did a double take, like, you got to be kidding me. I have never driven in New York City, and you want me to be driving the principal? And he said, well, it's easy. There's that NYPD radio car 6 feet in front of you. He says, the job is don't allow any more than 6 feet between you and him until we're done later tonight. And in essence, that really was that easy. And another thing was I guess it was a centennial celebration of the Statue of Liberty. Once again, given TAD orders to go down to New York City, and we all mustered at a maritime academy, I believe, if I recall that correctly. Maybe Kings Point, if that sounds vaguely familiar to anybody who might be listening. In any event, at some point, I remember J. Brian McKee saying, Clookie, get up here. So I show up, walk up to J. Brian McKee, and he hands me an envelope, and he says, you're going to be aboard the HMS Iroquois out of Halifax, Nova Scotia. And he handed me the envelope. He just looked at me, and I'm like, okay. And he says, well, go get on a plane and get up there. And all right. So, out of Kings Point, I have to find my way to the airport and get a ticket and get on a plane and fly to Halifax, and where I've never been before.
Sure.
There was no point of contact, no liaison officer. I literally got off the airplane, retrieved my baggage, and the best thing I could think to do was I saw a sailor, and I said, "You're a Canadian sailor, are you going to Halifax? He said, yeah, I am. I said, well, can I buy you a cab ride? And that's how I got to the base. I got to the checkpoint at the base, and I said, I'm here from NCIS, and I got to get to the Iroquois. And he pointed and showed up the Iroquois. Of course, they didn't know I was coming. So spent the night in Chief's berthing, and which was fine, and they treated me very well. But that just seemed to be the way NCIS worked. Was here's a job, go make it happen.
That is so true. It's so many times in our careers that we've been basically put on point like that. Say, just get it done. And to show up to a British,
Well, in this
ship,
case, you're Canadian. Yeah.
Canadian ship, and you're in Halifax, Nova Scotia. They must say, who is this guy?
Oh yeah, absolutely. They knew they were destined to go to New York City for the the celebration, but had no idea to expect an NCIS agent to embark there in Halifax. I think they were probably expecting to pick me up somewhere in the harbor down in New York. Yeah. But it was great. It was a great experience.
They somewhat expected you, though, it sounds like.
I think at some point they expected an NCIS agent to show up, but I didn't, probably not a day early. And yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
That's
great. That's a great story. And I'm sure they appreciate it at the end of the day, but that you they didn't have to work to find you. That you found them.
Exactly. Yeah, I found them.
Well, awesome. So Newport, Rhode Island. So you enjoyed the time there, but how long were you at Newport before they send you off to NIS headquarters to be a desk officer?
I was there about 5 years, which I believe was probably the longest time I ever spent in one office.
That's amazing.
It was amazing. Yeah. Most of my time at Newport was Gen Crim up until about the last year or so. And then I got launched into a fraud investigation against Raytheon Corporation. And that seemed to seal my fate for the next several years. And for whatever reason, Byron Taylor, I recall, came up from headquarters. He was running the fraud effort there at that point, and saw what was happening with the Raytheon case, and he said, I need you down in headquarters. So that was kind of a, here's a deal you can't refuse. You're coming to headquarters. And that was my experience as a desk officer in the fraud department. 23
Be careful with success, because
exactly. And I knew nothing of fraud. I had not gone through any of the fraud training or anything at that point.
Contracts, it was all alien to you, right?
Once again, here's your task. Figure it out. Get after it.
Great. So you go down there as the 23A desk officer. And right. Now, if I have to stop here, because anyone who's ever been a desk officer knows that's like being thrust into the great dark void, because you're in a position, you're kind of the middleman. You're when you call a field, they're like, oh, they're intruding my investigation, and
exactly.
and when you get a call from the field, they're like going, oh, this guy's never going to help me.
No, exactly right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the excitement is gone because you're reading reports, piles and piles of reports, and then you realize that what you're supposed to call out are the same mistakes that you made yourself, and you feel bad about calling the field to say, hey, you forgot to whatever, or you need to speed this up. And anyhow, it was a great experience, and I didn't appreciate it at the time as much as I did later, because and this is something too that I think is important for, if at all possible, every agent should do some time at headquarters. And I think what you find is you go back and forth in your mind. When you're in the field, you think headquarters hasn't got a clue. And then when you're at headquarters, after a year or two, you're realizing, I'm not sure the field has a clue. So to bounce back and forth kind of kept me balanced, I think, where I realized everybody's trying to do the right thing.
Yeah. That's so true, because, one of my first supervisors who had spent time at headquarters and came back out to the field, Art Hymans, was my supervisor in San Diego, one of my first supervisors. And he was so when we were trying to open up operation, he goes, this is how we need to do this because I've been at headquarters and I know what they're looking for. So it's great to have that headquarters experience come back to the field. So like you say, you have the experience from both sides and you know what each one requires.
Right. And you're in the field, you hear these decisions come down from headquarters, and you think that just doesn't make sense. But had you been at headquarters, it made perfect sense.
Sure.
And yeah, so you each are working within different dynamic environments, and having both experiences, I think, helps you level the playing field a bit.
Do you have any memories of guys or gals who were your supervisors or mentors at that time?
Yeah, I think, well, at that point, was a desk officer. Byron Taylor was my desk or my supervisor. He was a good guy. He could get excited at times, God rest his soul, but he let myself and I think Russ Porter was another desk officer at that time. I learned a tremendous amount from Russ. He's just a smart man and very dedicated. So I kind of followed his lead. But Byron left us be pretty well. He trusted us, and I very much appreciated that. And that was another leadership, tool or trait that I learned to respect and appreciate. You've hired these people, you've entrusted them to do something. Now give them a little bit of leash.
That's awesome. And Mona, did she come to work for NIS at that time?
Not at that time.
Okay.
But later on, she did come to work as a contractor, supporting the human resources department and so forth. Yeah, so anyhow, yeah, she had a little play in it as well.
That's awesome.
Later
So,
on.
so tell me about your one of your assignments that I think is kind of interesting. It is always an interesting assignment is when you went to be the representative to the Office of Naval Inspector General. I bet that was a really interesting position at the time to be in.
Once again, a learning process right from day one. It wasn't really quite sure how that fit worked, but quickly, realized that I was there to support them. A role that I had not anticipated was their overview or oversight of the black programs that the Navy was involved in research and development.
Mhm.
That was fascinating.
I bet.
Absolutely loved that. Going over to places like DARPA
Hmm.
and learning about different technologies and weapon systems that were being developed. Yeah, once again, this is the beauty of NCIS, right? One day you're investigating a homicide, the next day you're trying to prevent a terror attack, and then all of a sudden they're telling you, oh, we want you to go watch over the development of this new weapons system. By the way, you can't tell anybody about it. And, let us know if you see some vulnerability there from an espionage standpoint. I'm like, okay, I've never worked CI, but I'll do my best. So that was a fascinating time.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget one day sitting in my office there at the Navy IG's office, and I got a phone call from NCI's headquarters, which was just blocks away at that point.
Sure.
And this was when Roy Nedrow was our director, our first civilian director. And the secretary said, Mr. Nedrow is on his way over to see you. You can imagine. This is just out of the blue. I'm like, okay, our first civilian director is on his way to see me. This lowly, I think I was a 13 at that point, maybe. Yeah, I guess it was. And this can't be good. Yeah, this can't be good. I want to be careful how I explain the rest of this. Nedrow shows up in my office. He knocks on the door, and of course I stand, at attention.
Sure.
And he said, relax. He said, I just need you to follow me. We're going to go into the office of the Inspector General, and I need you as a witness. I said, okay, stand by. So he turned smartly and marched off, and I was right on his heels. He went into the Inspector General's office unannounced, and said, basically, there's been some suspicious activity, and we need you to cease and desist as follows. I don't want to get into the details.
Sure.
And Roy, being a very direct man that he was, and I respected him greatly. He was a great leader. He was exactly what I think and NCIS needed at that point. He said his piece, and before the admiral could speak back, he said, "That's all," and turned around and walked out. And he says, "Mark, you can go back to your office now."
Wow.
Yeah, so that was probably one of the more interesting experiences at the Navy IG's office.
Oh my goodness. So did the admiral call you back in the office after and said, what the?
Oh no, he was pretty well rocked back on his heels at that point.
I bet.
Yeah, it was not a good day for the admiral.
Director Nedrow had that command presence about him that,
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, I think still to today, I remember him walking around the halls over Building 111, and I mean, people would come to brace up
Exactly
in the hallways.
Yeah, he had that presence about him, absolutely, and I think that was part of the why my blood pressure went through the roof when I heard he was coming to see me. But I was amazed at how well and professionally he handled that. Kudos to him.
What a great director. So after the Inspector General's office, you became the assistant special agent in charge of the Washington Fraud Unit. So that must have been an experience. That here's a guy who's never been to a fraud class, but you've got the experience with what you've done in the past to take on this very important position.
And fortunately, worked for a great man, Tom Fisher.
Tom Fisher.
God rest him. What a wonderful man. Came from a similar background to me. He went through the Baltimore City Police Academy, but he actually walked the tough streets of Baltimore City as a patrolman and later a detective, I believe, maybe even working in their special operations branch. Tom was a great leader. One of my favorite bosses throughout the years. So the opportunity to work with him. Of course, this was, if I have my dates correct, this would have been during the time frame of Ill Wind, if not wrapping up Ill Wind at that point.
Sure. Yeah, late 80s, early 90s, right?
Yeah, exactly. So some wonderful, well trained, well experienced fraud agents in that office. Brad McKnight being one of them. Brad has passed some time ago, but great guy. Loved working with him. Learned a tremendous amount from him. But we had a lot of good cases, strong cases there in the DC area, as you might imagine. Some of them tied back to my experiences with the Navy IG's office. So yeah, it was a great experience. The environment wasn't all that great down at Buzzards Point in DC.
I forgot you guys were down at Buzzards Point.
Oh yeah. It was a great
gosh.
place. I'll tell you what. I remember one time, one of my agents worked for me with me, Paul Leo, who, by the way, was
great man,
great man, great friend, and my a cohort in the Annapolis City Police Department. That's where I met Paul. Well, I eventually convinced him to come over to NCIS, and he did. And I think he was with me in the fraud office there in DC. And I remember one day he said, "Hey, you got to look out the window. There's a body coming down the river, the Anacostia, or as we used to call it, the Nastacostia."
Oh my gosh!
And then another day, we got to the building and they had it all cordoned off, and there was another body on the front steps of the main entrance to the building. But I know the FBI field office, the DC field office, was in that building at the same time. Now,
sure was. Yeah, one of the sketchiest neighborhoods in DC.
Exactly. Yes, and the presence of the FBI and NCIS really just doesn't matter. Apparently, they continue all the shenanigans. Yeah.
Oh my goodness!
It was a good tour. Yeah.
When I was a young agent doing narcotics in DC, we were doing a lot of narcotics operations down in there.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. That was
a crazy area.
Prime market area. Yeah, for sure. We moved, and then we moved. Thankfully, Tom. I don't know if Tom Fisher was the one that orchestrated or not, but he found the space over in John D'Avanzo, I think, was the regional director at that point.
Okay.
Anyhow, we moved over to Crystal City. Much finer environment. Yes.
Oh, absolutely. It's like this is where we should be.
That's right. Exactly.
Well, that a lot of people don't. And we call it economic crimes now. And fraud at that time was really one of the bailiwicks for our organization. I mean, the money we were bringing back in the Department of Navy from the work, the cases and the great cases you guys were working was just phenomenal. I remember seeing that through the 90s. It was just incredible until, obviously September 11th changed a lot of things. But up until that point, I mean, fraud was really kind of the moneymaker for the organization.
It was. Yeah, it truly was. Fraud was rampant at that point. And, I had left headquarters also working a major fraud case against another admiral from out in the Pacific. And, his retirement and departure from the Navy, there was some expenses he claimed that he shouldn't have. But yeah, I mean, it was not only internal, but it was external.
Sure.
Of course, with the major corporations that were contracting with the Navy. It was a fascinating time.
I remember at that time, of course, I was in San Diego at the time, and the fraud, we were trying to get, everything from arrest warrants to stuff through the U.S. Attorney's Office. And it was really difficult for us. But we would connect one of our fraud agents and they go, just hang with me. And they had all the connections with the U.S. Attorney's Office because they were U.S. Attorney.
That's right.
The cases.
Well, that's right. And that's where our cases all had to go, right? They were not, the very few had a UCMJ engagement. It was all done with the U.S. Attorney's Office. And it was either DC or the Northern District of Virginia. It seemed like that's where we were doing most of our work.
Wow. It's good stuff. It was great. It was great work indeed. So you go from the assistant special agent in charge of the Washington Fraud Unit, and then you go to Bahrain as the resident agent in charge when we still had racks there. So what was that experience about moving to Bahrain with the family, a young family, and getting set up there?
Yeah, at that point we had 3 children and a dog, and we flew halfway around the world to Bahrain. And I'll never forget my wife's first comment as the door opened up. And of course, there's no jetway; you have to walk down steps to walk across the tarmac. And she said, "Oh, that smell!" it had a unique effluvia to it. Yeah. And Ed Gross had just coincidentally been on the same flight with us. I guess he had been back to the States he was stationed in Bahrain at that point and happened to be flying back on the same flight. And his words were immediately, "Yeah, welcome to Bahrain. This is where we live." But here's a great human interest story, right? So first time overseas, overseas assignment, a young family, 3 kids in tow, and they're all small. All elementary age, and a dog. And once we got into the airport, we were immediately greeted by our NCIS colleagues. That's awesome. Everybody from the office, small office, I think there was a handful, maybe 6, 7 of us, were there in the airport to meet us.
That's awesome.
And just escort us through the process, expedite the handling of the dog and the kids. And then, of course, here we are, still a little bit shell-shocked. And I remember Mark Prue said, "Well, I've got the kids." And he took all 3 kids and just ran off with them, left us standing at the carousel looking for our luggage. And somebody else says, "Well, I got the dog," and off they went. I'm like, I looked at Mona and I said, "Well, I guess at some point we'll all be reunited." But it worked out perfectly. They had it all planned. We showed up at the hotel that they had put us up in. And they had stocked all the cupboards with groceries to include dog food for the dog.
Yeah,
and that's that whole sponsorship program, right? I sincerely hope we still do that as an agency, where they had thought of everything we would need, showing up at whatever it was 2 a.m. in a foreign country, and we just all we had to do was go in and go to sleep, because we knew when we woke up in the morning, the food was there, the dog food was there, the beds were made up, everything we would need was available.
What an amazing experience. I mean, I've had good moves like that, but I don't think I've ever had anything quite that well, especially when they pack your cupboard with food. That's great.
Oh yeah. And we carried that on throughout the process. And even when I returned later on, it was still going on. That just seemed to be, and I think other offices did it as well.
Sure.
just the nature of NCIS being a family.
Yeah, it really is, and I think that's one thing that we do. Because we have those overseas positions. There's they go that nth degree to take care of people who are coming over, especially their first time.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, that's great. So, tell me about the Bahrain office at the time. So, we weren't a field office yet. So it was still
That's
just
right.
an ISRA, an NCIS
Resident agency. Yeah, that's right. Primarily focused on in the Middle East there, not venturing too far into Africa and so forth, but occasionally. Wow, what a great experience for a real live interaction with the Department of the Navy. Specifically, wasn't the Fifth Fleet at that point. It was just simply NAVCENT, Naval Central Command. Had a great experience with Admiral Doug Katz, 3-star at that point. And so as the RAC, you were not only the RAC of the office, but you were his executive protection whenever he would travel. And one of the most outstanding experiences, I think, was one day he called me up and he said, Mark, we're going to down into Pakistan. And I'm trying to think of the specific place we went to, but it was, we ventured to the border of Pakistan and Afghanistan, where the Khyber rifles maintain security. And I remember we flew into Peshawar, Pakistan on a P-3, got off the plane, and there was a full motorcade waiting for us. And this is back before our semi-automatic weapons. So I had a 6-shot revolver as my only sidearm. And you can see where this is going.
Goodness.
So we get in the motorcade, and I notice it's like half military and half civilian police, Pakistani police. And we start, it's myself, Admiral Katz, his aide, and his wife, Sharon, lovely lady. And we start heading towards the border. When we get to a drop arm gate, a drop arm comes up and all the civilian police fall off. Now it's the embassy driver in our limo and then 2 military vehicles. And I start to get a little bit nervous because now we're going into, the frontier as it were. Yeah. And, we were going to the Khyber Pass. That's where our ultimate destination was.
Wow.
And so I called up to the driver and I said, what's up with this? And he said, oh yeah, it's far too dangerous for the police, so just the military will come in here. And we proceeded to drive down the road for, it felt like an eternity. And occasionally you would see a guy standing on the side of the road with a rifle. And I said, to the embassy driver, I said, what's up with this guy? And he said, well, that's our protection. These guys probably also worked for Osama bin Laden, truth be told. But I looked at the admiral and I said, I've got 6 shots here. I said, I did not anticipate this. So, but we'll do the best we can. And we proceeded on. Thank the good Lord we had a safe trip. It was a great tour. And we came back through, the frontier, as they called it. And, this is a sort of excitement that you get as an NCIS agent.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. So how long did that trip take? I mean, it must have taken a while to get up to Khyber Pass, right?
It did. It was hours. Yeah, it was hours in both directions. Yeah, but
and the fact that you're sitting there with a 6-shot for hours driving up and back.
It was nerve-wracking, I got to tell you, because I didn't have a great deal of faith in the rest of the escort, caravan, so to speak.
Sure.
But especially when half of them peeled off at the drop arm, and we went through one little village, and it looked like something from a country western show, with literally boardwalk sidewalks and frontier-like buildings. And I noticed on a couple of them they had these stacks of white paper packages packed up nice and neat in a pyramid shape. So I asked the embassy driver, so what are they selling? He says, oh, that's heroin. I said, oh, good. Okay. It was as if you'd went into a supermarket and they had cans of Campbell's soup piled up neatly for a display.
Wow.
Yeah. So just an amazing experience. So yeah, we spent a lot of time in Pakistan, Admiral Katz was great about doing human relations type, pressing the flesh and spreading the good news of the Navy. Well, Bahrain itself was also a little bit unsettled at that time. As you might know, the government is Sunni, but the main populace, by far the most populous sect, is Shia. And occasionally the Shia would get ramped up from their mullahs back in Qum or where else in Iran. And we had a couple of pretty exciting times. I remember one time, I think it was either Michael Marks or Mark Prue came back to the office and said, boss, there's going to be some issues down in the gold souk. And we need to just keep the Navy out of there. So we, of course, gave the Navy an alert, said, just let's put the gold souk off limits. And sure enough, later that night, the Shia overran the gold souk and actually overran the police station down there and released all the prisoners and so forth. It was quite a scene.
Goodness.
But yeah, so exciting
Well,
time for Bahrain.
so when you left your office in Bahrain and you go to your house there in Bahrain, did you have to drive through those areas, or how did that go?
Yeah, it was not too bad.
Yeah,
You kind of knew where to stay away from and where not to go. And
sure.
I had a short commute. Actually, for a period of time, I actually rode my bike between
Really?
the house and the base. Yeah, it just you keep your head on a swivel, and yeah, it's all
Keep
good.
moving.
The locals really, I think, for the most part, were good people, and
Yeah,
we
sure.
really enjoyed our time there. And yeah, so it was a good time.
Well, great. So after you leave Bahrain and you return to the Northeast Field Office
That's right.
as the assistant special agent in charge there, 95 to 98. Now,
Yeah.
so you're there for this is where I actually met you the first time, was during a detail in New York. So it was.
Mhm.
Can you talk to a little bit about what the focus was of the field office at that time and what you guys were doing?
Yeah, a little again. Fortunately, it was a little bit of everything. We had some counterintelligence work to be done, and we were that close to New York City, of course, and the New Jersey area. We were. The office was at Weapons Station Earl,
Yeah.
and in Monmouth County, New Jersey. We also had some really strong fraud work going on
Okay.
in that area, and of course some crim work. And of course, being on a weapons station, there was always the CT type concerns. There were some special weapons in that area, so we were, working closely with the command and the Marine Corps there for
Mhm.
that. But a fair amount of time also just augmenting our sister offices, whether it be Philadelphia or New York City and so forth. It was a good time. Yeah,
Yeah.
but more of the what you would think of a typical NCIS field office with a little bit of crim, a little bit of fraud, a little bit of CI, and then some special assignments from time to time.
Sure.
But yeah, kind of brought me back to a more broad perspective on what NCIS was really all about.
Sure. I can tell you that one of the most professional office experiences was when I visited to do a detail with the Israeli defense minister. And we flew into New York City. And as our plane came to tarmac, and we didn't have this in Washington, D.C. So to me, it was really cool to pull up and see a motorcade of NYPD highway units, as well as the NCIS agents who were there to make and would take over the detail. And what an amazing experience that was.
Oh, absolutely. And all the credit on that goes to our New York office. And for years, and I would be remiss if I tried to remember all the names, but I know J. Brian McKee was a big part of that.
Sure.
Johnny Crimmon's name comes to mind,
Mhm.
but the relationship, those guys work day and night on those relationships with NYPD. To the point that the commissioner knew us, respected us, and would see us on a phone call. Commissioner, I got to come in and see you.
Mhm.
And within a day, you were in the commissioner's office.
Yeah.
So yeah, just a great relationship. And you're right, professionally run protective service details,
Mhm.
top to bottom. Yeah.
Well, it's amazing because I remember Director Brent, when I was working for him, he made a comment that there's no other place in the world where an NCIS agent can just walk into the director or the SAC of the FBI's office in a large city like that, one of the biggest locations they have, and have basically carte blanche, a visit opportunity with the SAC at FBI.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you might recall that, one of the first and certainly one of the more productive joint terrorism task forces was there in New York City. Yep. And we were an absolute huge part of that. Everyone insisted that NCIS be a part of it.
That's awesome. That is awesome. So, so that's interesting because the first World Trade Center bombing happened in 93?
Something I believe like that. So. Yep.
Yeah. So they formed up these terrorism task force after that, and that was probably the first terrorism task force, right?
That's my understanding.
Yes. Wow. Mm-hmm. Interesting. So now you get the opportunity to go to the other side of the world to be the resident agent in charge of Okinawa. And right. So when you get the call to say, hey, you've been selected, or you see the gen admin that says you're now going to Okinawa. Yeah. What was the first thing in your mind that you thought of?
I think the first thing was, wow, that's a long flight, and I still have 3 kids to get over there, but we'll make it. It was excitement, I think, really. Never been to the Far East. It was going to be a totally different experience in that we'd be dealing with the Marine Corps almost exclusively, right? I mean, there's a naval hospital there, but the vast majority of the military presence on Okinawa is United States Marine Corps. And I was excited about that. I always respected the Marine Corps and thought it was just a great opportunity for not just me, but the family. And from a family perspective, Lee, I would say that was definitely our favorite assignment.
People say that a lot. Everybody that goes to Okinawa says that's probably the best family experience that they had.
Yes, exactly. Our family felt safe out in town. There was plenty of recreational opportunities. The host nation was super friendly. We were there during an era where the locals, loved us, and we just had a great time. Loved the food, loved the people, loved the place. Got a little warm at times, but yeah. That's, and I relieved a great man, Mark Fox, was there as my, ahead of me, and great turnover there. And now here's a quick, and if I get too many of these stories, stop me. But no. In New Jersey, up in Weapons Station Earl, there was just hundreds of acres of pine forest that I could run through forever for my daily PT. So I remember when I got the assignment to go to Okinawa, I didn't know anything about Okinawa. Mm-hmm. And I called Mark Fox up and I said, hey, tell me about the office. We got through all the business part. And I said, now listen, I love to run up here, and I'm running 4 or 5 miles a day through this pine forest and so forth. And I'm hearing nothing from Mark. And I said, so if you got some woods out there that I can run through, still crickets, nothing. I said, Mark is still there. He says, woods? This is triple tier jungle. You're not running through anything. I said, oh, okay. And he says, you'll see when you get here. So it was a very different environment, but we loved it. It was great.
And Mark is a good guy to work with because he was my SAC in Naples, and I tell you, he was a hoot because he always had something going on. Very dry sense of humor that would just catch you off guard sometimes.
And he later, yes, he was so funny, but a great agent and a good leader. He later came to work with me at IJM, the International Justice Mission.
Oh wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, and he would tell stories to these young college kids with a straight face. And Mark, you could never tell whether he was making something up or he was telling you the absolute truth.
I know.
And he had them convinced that he was like a medalist in the 1980 figure skating of the Olympics, and they believed him. But I mean, that's just he could tell a story like nobody's business.
Oh my goodness. I have to tell this story about Mark because we're Mark Fox story. So he becomes the SAC of the European field office. Right. And so my ASAC says, hey, you need to give Mr. Fox a briefing on the current developmental double agent operations you have going. So sure. So I give him this whole brief about 6 operations we have in development. We're doing this and doing that. And Mark is just listening very intently. And at the end of it, he goes, all right, so I've got an idea. And I think this will probably assist us in getting these things off the ground. I want you to go over to the child daycare center and I want you to recruit a 2-year-old. And I want you to kind of develop that 2-year-old. We'll do them through their teenage years all the way into college. And then hopefully by that time, they'll be ready to do one of these operations because it seems like it's taken that long. And I'm sitting there listening and I'm like going, and I'm looking with this face of like, are, yes, sir. Yes, sir. You want me to do what? And he just breaks up laughing at the end. But he goes, I know you guys are doing the best you can. Keep doing what you're doing. So
he's a great guy. Still close friend.
Yeah, sure. So the type of cases you're working in Okinawa at the time, because it's been throughout history, it went from being the Wild West back in the Vietnam days to this time in the 90s. So can you talk about some of the any major cases that broke during that time where you're there?
Of course we had to, Marine Corps gave us our share of crimes against persons, right? Some involving some local nationals, some not. We were working some drug cases, worked very closely with the local police, very good to us. And I'm sure they were collecting on us at the same time.
Sure.
So we were playing that game. So there were some CI issues. There was, of course, talk about shutting down the air base Fatema, which I think is a, repeating theme there.
Yeah.
But fortunately, I was only there for 2.5 years. It's a 2-year tour. I was trying to double it because we loved it so much. And I remember Ernie Simon calling me from headquarters and saying, hey, we need you back here at headquarters. We want you to think about coming back here. And of course, I leaped on that word think. And I said, well, okay, I'll think about it. And the next day, Ernie called back and he says, let's forget the word think. You're coming back. I said, well, I really don't want to. We're having a great time. He says, you're still not understanding. You will be coming back, and you're coming back to the Human Resources Department, which, coming from an active office, an active crim office, back to run the Human Resources office.
You're an HR guy now.
Once again, I've got no HR experience, but let me, before I leave Okinawa, I want to say how much I enjoyed working with Marine Corps. I got to thoroughly respect the Marine Corps. Actually, walking down the hall one day of one of their headquarters buildings, I passed a name I recognized, Supco.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked in and I said, Colonel Supco. And he says, yeah. This is Mark Clookie. You went to Brooklyn Park High School, didn't you? And he says, I did. And he said, you did too, didn't you? So, yeah, in Okinawa, I meet an old high school colleague. And the Marine Corps fellows we had, the CID agents that were assigned to us there at the office, were just tremendous. Absolutely loved working with them. Great time.
That is amazing. And we do have a great relationship with the Marine Corps. I know that even today with Camp Pendleton, the SAC there has a great working relationship with the Marine Corps, and you see that throughout the agency. They're very professional. And those these experiences actually led up to why we still have a great experience. You guys like yourself who kind of led during the time, it kind of leaves a legacy that follows us. So love the Marine Corps, love working with those guys.
Absolutely.
So you go to headquarters, be HR guy now.
That's right.
And tell me about that, because did you spend a lot of time as the HR, because you're going to go over to do I think a really interesting job, the J2CI, which I think would be kind of cool. But tell me about that time as director of doing what you were doing with the HR department, as the head of agent control and personnel operations.
Yeah. Well, this was my first foray into being on the other side of the transfer gens, if you will, right?
Yeah, sure.
And what a painful process, really.
Yeah.
I know it causes pain in the field, but it causes pain at headquarters too, trying to put the right people in the right places and be fair about it. And that became one of my greatest challenges later as the director as well.
Sure. It still is today.
I have no doubt. Yeah.
Yep.
And I've talked with Director Lopez about that. And yeah, I understand that. The people there were well-meaning and tried their best. I know that, everybody has complaints about human resources but it was a good bunch of civilian folks. They did give me a little pushback though when I told them they had to stop wearing jeans and flip-flops to work. Yeah, that was like one of my first first challenges was no more jeans and flip-flops and shorts, and no, we're gonna up
we'll be professional now.
Dress code a little bit. So I got some pushback on that, but we won the war there, and it turned out to be a very informative tour for me. I learned a lot about what went into the transfer gens, not just the transfers, but the promotion cycles. Of course, that raises a great deal of angst about folks feeling like they haven't been treated fairly and so forth.
Sure.
And, it was apparent that everybody there had the best of intentions. There was no malice towards the field at all. Everybody was trying to do their very best. And that was reassuring for me to see.
Yeah, it's good.
And I was able to take that back out into the field later as a field leader and assure people that, there are no hateful people in the human resources department. They're trying to do the best job they can and be fair about it. It just doesn't always work out the way you'd hope it would. And
that's right.
That really is the case.
That is exactly right, because I've seen that as being in headquarters as well. That painful process of trying to get people, when I got the call to go to headquarters, it was like, hey, have you ever done this? Yeah, I did that a little bit. And the next thing you see yourself on a gen admin saying, you're now the this of that, running this department. And you get sent back to you. And literally you go, okay, all right, this is a new learning experience. So you lean on the mentors that you had, and then you lean on the mentors that you want to have in order to get the job done. I'm sure that's kind of how it ran for you as well when you get back there.
It did. Yeah. It was good. It was a good tour.
Well,
so it was a good tour.
So then you get selected for, I think, was a really interesting position as a GS-15. You go over to the Pentagon as the chief of the Joint Staff Support Branch for the Joint Counterintelligence Center, which is called J2CI. Tell me about that as far as what the focus was and what our participation in it was for NCIS.
Right. This assignment probably caused me more trepidation than any of the other assignments. Never been in the Pentagon other than to deliver some messages. Sure. Had some CI experience, but not a great deal. I knew I was going to a joint command, not only to support the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which is daunting in and of itself, sure. But to work in a joint command where the majority of the personnel were from Army MI.
Sure.
And again, an organization I had very little experience with. But fortunately, as always, good people, well-meaning, hardworking, wonderful people. Turned out to be some assets from other organizations embedded in this group. Can't go any further than that. But a great learning experience for me. And I found that my staff, whenever there was a shortcoming on my part, the staff stepped up and said, let's walk you through this process. Yeah. But it really came down to, we were the counterintelligence advisors to the J2 on the Joint Chiefs, or for the Joint Chiefs. And so we would, just consume volumes of intel and work with the various intel services, and then put together a package for the J2, looking at global threats from an espionage standpoint.
Sure.
Who was working where, who was doing what, trying to keep them up. But as you probably noted, this was a short-lived tour for me.
Sure, absolutely. This is August 2001.
August 2001, exactly. And, 4 weeks later, basically, comes 9/11. And that was truly a time that changed my perspective on life. I was in my office sorting through various emails and such. And I remember I was going to take a break, go get a coffee or something. I stepped out of the office and one of my analysts, very bright young man named Gene, is running down the hall towards me. And I thought, that is odd. Nobody runs in the Pentagon. You just never see it. He's running at me. And he says, yeah, boss, there's a big problem. And we need you to come down into our skiff, which is a couple layers down in the basement in a different wedge. So as we're walking at a brisk pace, he says, planes just hit the World Trade Center in New York City. And I'm thinking, well, it's a nice clear day. It's not a weather issue. Must be a mechanical failure of some sort. And, I started asking Gene questions he has no answers for. How many are hurt? What's going on? He said, I don't know. I just know that this is going to be an issue. So we get down into the skiff and we're not there very long. And the second plane, of course, hits the other tower. And we realize we've got a big issue. Yep. So we start strategizing, what role do we as J2CI have in this? What are we going to be doing? My boss at that point for the section was out of the Pentagon. He wasn't there. So it's all on me now. And just as we started to put some strategies together, the alarms for the Pentagon go off. Oh, now, we're in the basement in a skiff, and we hear nothing, feel nothing, see nothing. And we think, well, this is odd, precautionary, or maybe it has something to do with the construction that's still going on in Wedge 1. So as we exit our skiff, we start hearing more specific announcements of do not use corridors, so forth. And I can't remember the names of the numbers of the corridors, but they told us where not to go. And everybody, very orderly, hundreds, thousands of people are walking in one direction. And the first instance I realized something was drastically wrong. There are people running in the opposite direction, and they're all the medics and so forth. We exited the building, and then there's black smoke rolling over top of us. And I realized, I guess we've been hit now. Wow. So at that point, it was all about just trying to figure out where my people are. Fortunately, we went to our muster location on the parking lot, and thank God everybody showed up for my division. So everybody was accounted for. And it was about that time that, I don't think it was called the defense, whatever the security service was for the Pentagon at that point. They were going around the Pentagon with a radio patrol car on the PA system saying, go for cover, there's another plane inbound. Of course, this would be the plane that would go down in Shanksburg or Shanksville, Pennsylvania. And so we're like, where's cover? There's a tree line along the river. Mm-hmm. And before we could do that, one of our fighters came overhead and, did a wing wave at us. And we felt like, oh, okay, this is going to work out. Okay. We'll be all right. Of course, we're looking at the fire and all the response there. And then I saw something that really touched me. Apparently, there was a group of individuals, military personnel that were, I didn't realize that the Pentagon had a daycare center. And a group of individuals was responsible for bringing the children in an emergency out of the daycare center because the parents wouldn't necessarily have time to get there, and they may have to continue their own job, their assignments, right? So these military personnel from all branches are bringing out literally cribs with, the non-walkers and toddlers inside and hold the hands of others as they're coming out of the daycare center. They formed a circle with the cribs and put all the walking children inside the circle. And then all the military personnel formed a perimeter around the outside of the cribs facing out. And they just had that look like, no, nobody's getting these kids.
Yeah. Awesome.
And that was just so touching to see that.
Sure.
So once I realized we had our team together, I said, have we got a coup and a continuation of operations
Mhm.
plan or protocol. And one of my young folks said, "Yeah, there's a building not far from here, be about a mile or two walk, but we can get there, and that's our backup." It was a DIA facility,
Sure.
and the next thing that was just so surreal, and I'll never forget, is walking across. To get there, we had to walk across Arlington National Cemetery, and to be walking across the cemetery, stepping on the graves of heroes, and
Yeah.
looking back at the Pentagon periodically, still on fire.
Wow.
It's just a sight. You just never forget those kind of things.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely.
Fortunately, we got to our coop site. We kind of stood things up again, and
Okay.
yeah.
Wow. I mean, so everyone remembers where they were on 9/11, but you were one of the first people I've talked about who was actually at the Pentagon when it happened. My sister-in-law, one of the contributors to this program, was an Air Force officer that
Mm,
just happened to be off that day. I guess she was in one of the places that collapsed. She was not there personally, but
gotcha.
um, just the memories of that day, 395 being closed down. Literally people walking up the highway
Oh yeah,
to go home. But
nothing
what
moved.
about you? I mean, so you went to the new location. How did
Right.
you get home that day? Do you remember that?
I do. It was late, much later that night when we finally realized we had done everything we possibly could.
Mhm.
Um, I, at that point in my commute, I was driving from Annapolis to can't remember the name of the station, but it was a station near the Washington Beltway on the eastern side, and I parked there in the parking garage, and then I would take the subway into the Pentagon. Um, so I just simply walked to the closest subway station.
Mhm.
At that point, later in the night, they had reopened and begun to move the subway trains again, and I was able to get back to my vehicle and drive home.
I
So
remember a lot of people talked about that was one day that people in Northern Virginia and Washington, D.C. really came together to support each other. Everything from child daycare centers outside the loop where people dropped their kids off every day. I mean, people stayed over, didn't get paid, but stayed to help, support the people in the Pentagon and in the DC that had been affected by this plane crashing into the Pentagon.
absolutely. Yeah, it was great to see the communities come together. I got home that night. It was probably 9 or 9:30, and my wife said, "Hey, the neighbors wanted to have a prayer vigil. Can we meet in the street with them?" Sure. And we lived on a cul-de-sac, and pretty much every neighbor on our block came together and prayed over the matter.
Man, I tell you, that was a day. That was a day. So
It
what?
was.
So after 9/11, so you assume you get assigned to be the special agent in charge of the new Middle East field office, or wouldn't be new, but it was now the Middle East field office. You go back there, and now you're going to be kind of literally overseeing Middle Eastern operations. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. It was something I really wanted. Headquarters called me up and said, "Would you consider?" And I said, "Absolutely. It's more than a consideration. I want that job. Send me as soon as possible." Um, it was a huge lift at first. Up until that point, the field office had been relatively small. It had grown from the last time I'd been there, but my immediate guidance and direction from my input, the admiral's input, and headquarters was we needed to grow the office to well over 130 personnel. Now, they wouldn't all be stationed on Bahrain, but they'd be spread out through Southwest Asia,
Mhm.
of course, throughout the theater of operations up in Iraq and Afghanistan, and then, of course, the eastern part of Africa. So we'd be spread out, but it meant building buildings.
Mhm.
We had a building put up in less than a year, and it had to
Wow.
be bomb proof. There were all sorts of specifications at that point about how our buildings would have to be. The Navy rallied around us, gave us everything we needed. People started pouring in. Our reserve unit was mobilized, and I got to work with some great guys from our reserve unit, um, like Bill Seidenstein and I'm trying to Drew Lieb from the New Jersey. He was the head of the New Jersey State Police Bomb Squad. Had
Mhm.
been one of the investigators on the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center.
Wow.
Uh, so we were getting some world class talent sent over to us and working alongside of us.
You know, you're
But
you brought up the Naval Reserve units, and I think that people don't understand out there that, we have these Naval Reserve units, which are basically populated by guys who are police officers and detectives, and like yourself, guys hit a bomb squads.
Right.
And so you had those guys at your command
Yes.
to take care of issues.
And to their credit, it wasn't as if we had forced them to come. They were
Yeah.
begging to come. They wanted to be a
Wow.
part of the game. They wanted to play, and they contributed tremendously. Well experienced guys, had full careers behind them already in various aspects of law enforcement, from homicide detectives in New York City to bomb squad
Mhm.
commanders and so forth. So tremendous talent, and we used every one of them. Of course, we had linguists coming in.
Mhm.
Uh, and then, my daily routine really started with briefings with Admiral Tim Keating, another tremendous Navy leader, wonderful man, wonderful leader. He had broad shoulders to be carrying what he could. He now became, the head of the combined command. It was
Sure.
every force in the area, whether it be Bahraini, Saudi, you name it, the United Arab Emirates. Of course, the Brits were involved, the Canadians were involved, and he is Naval Forces Central Command and running the whole thing. But every day we had a briefing with him, and never in my NCIS career did I feel more connected to the Navy and the Marine Corps than at
Sure.
that point. General Earl Hailston from the Marine Corps was there as a 3-star. And, just again, daily interactions with these tremendous leaders. And everything that we did as an NCIS office was coordinated with them.
Mhm.
And this led me to yet another experience of the Navy and the Marine Corps need very specific assets in very specific places at certain times.
Sure.
And that led to something I'll share later about being the director.
Okay.
But, I don't know that I ever had a more fulfilling role as far as knowing that what we were doing contributed to the greater good of the Department of Defense.
Sure.
And what our agents and our analysts did over there. Tragically, we lost one of our analysts over there, a brilliant analyst. Unfortunately, Colin Jones Hoffman was shot and killed in Hilla, Iraq. And what a talent he was. Young man who spoke multiple languages fluently, had served as an analyst at NCIS headquarters, and then also at the time was serving as an analyst for NAVCENT. And that hit us all pretty hard. We
Sure.
lost Kylan. So,
We were very lucky
yeah,
during the Iraq War to only lose one individual. I mean, the Air Force lost several
absolutely.
USI
Yeah,
agents. So
very fortunate. And I'm, still to this day, very saddened by that.
yeah,
And anyhow, it was a good tour. It was rewarding, and I can't say enough good about our agents, our analysts, our support staff, everything from computer scientists to the yeomen and the secretaries that supported us over there. It was just a tremendous effort.
wow. So I mean, the fact that the office grew to support the Navy and the Marine Corps was very flexible. The locations that you cited, I'm sure there were East Africa, Middle East, even down some of the islands off the coast of Africa. Um, could you talk about a little bit about how how quickly that populating those outer offices took?
I would say probably within 6 months, we had
That's
most of our
amazing.
personnel in place, and
That's amazing.
that endeared us to the Marine Corps and the Navy, because they realized, wow, these guys can mobilize in a hurry and bring us some real talent.
That is awesome.
Yeah, one of the things that we did every day, every morning with the Admiral's brief was we would review after action reports from kinetic strikes that the Navy or the Marine Corps would have taken the day before. And I'll never forget, it was fairly early on. They had asked, and again, this is just how responsive NCIS was able to be because of our personnel. Within the first, actually literally the first day of the war, they'd asked us if we could possibly support the capturing of the Gulf oil platforms in the Northern Arabian Gulf. And I asked, well, what kind of assets do you need? And they said, well, we need linguists and we need analysts and anybody that could support, the effort going in. And I said, what's it going to look like? I said, well, the SEALs will go in first and, stabilize the platform. And then EOD will go in after them to make sure that everything is safe. And then we'll send you in. And I'm like, wow. So we're working shoulder to shoulder with SEALs and EOD.
Yeah, sure.
And we had linguists and we had analysts. And so to make a long story short, the next morning, I showed up for the briefing. Admiral Keating swung around in his seat, looked at me, he said, "This one's for you, Mr. Clookie." And he showed a video of the Ba'ath Party headquarters in Basra, Iraq. And all of a sudden you see two T-LAMs come in from both sides and the building is no more. And that was a direct result of our linguist analysts being part of those platform takeovers and recovering intelligence that said, oh, now we know where the Ba'ath Party headquarters is in Basra, and had specific coordinates. And that was, so talk about direct impact.
Yeah.
That's a great example of NCIS.
Well, I got to tell you, that must have been some of the most rewarding work that you've ever done in the organization, being a part of that effort during the early years of the Iraq War.
Truly was. Absolutely. Yeah. And then the effort in Iraq and Afghanistan as well carried on. And that gave, me specifically some personal satisfaction given the Pentagon experience. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. So, so you're there until 2007 or so, right?
Right.
And then you get promoted to. I'm sorry, I may have skipped over something, but you go back to headquarters and you become the executive assistant for the deputy director of management and administration. So what was the focus during that time as far as what you guys wanted to achieve?
I think we recognized after 9/11 that NCIS needed to be really mobile and responsive, develop our ability to respond quickly with the right personnel and the right technology, and be tied closely to the Marine Corps and the Navy in that regard. So it was all about proper staffing and proper training and proper equipping of our people out in the field. So that really was the focus. It was a bit of a challenge at times, but fortunately we had the budget to work with.
Sure.
That's one thing that the budget truly brought for us. So good and bad. Had some, challenges at the Pentagon, negotiating different things, working out the budget issues and so forth. But all in all, it was a good assignment, and I enjoyed yet another learning experience. Everywhere I went, it was something new, and it was good.
Well, this obviously all the experience you've had up to this point is really built up to October of 2007 when you were promoted to the senior executive service community, and you become the executive assistant director for Middle East and Pacific operations. So now half the world is yours. So this has got to be a really amazing experience as a leadership in a leadership position. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Another daunting, responsibility, realizing just how many people and responsibilities you have now throughout half the world. I think the challenge was recognizing just how different offices were going to be as far as staffing, responsibilities, missions, and trying to be able to keep my arms wrapped around that whole picture. Sure. And not let anything fall through the cracks. We had great SACs. I had a great staff.
Mhm.
Um, very few personnel issues, thankfully. And it was really just a matter of making sure that I touched base on a regular basis with all my SACs.
Mhm.
And that, of course, that meant you were on the phone almost 24 hours a day. 2 o'clock in the morning phone calls with some breaking issue were not uncommon, but you realize that that's part of the deal. That's what you're doing. A lot of air miles flying back and forth, not just to headquarters, but to all the field offices, trying to touch base, trying not to leave anybody out.
Sure.
But I am so thankful for the great leadership teams that we had in place at that point.
Well, that's great. So, as far as senior Navy and Marine Corps leadership, who were you? Basically, who were your counterparts or your colleagues that you would work with?
Yeah, just any number of the admirals and generals throughout the theater. It did require, again, movement, not just, of course, the office was in Pearl Harbor, but it caused me to move to Okinawa, to fly out to Okinawa and elsewhere along San Diego.
Sure.
Of course, one of the individuals I was very fortunate to work with, again, was Admiral Tim Keating. At this point, as I mentioned earlier, Admiral Keating and I had worked together in Bahrain. He was Fifth Fleet Commander, and now he was CINCPAC. So it's always good to have contacts at those high places that you know and have worked well together with. So that was a real joy for me to be able to work with Admiral Keating once again. We never had any pushback. I think we were still very well thought of by the Navy and Marine Corps leadership, whether it was on the West Coast or Far East. It's just a great relationship, and didn't have any snags.
That's great. That's great. So, and now we come to the moment. But I thought was really as we were talking the other day that this is something that I didn't know. So the position of director for NCIS is now been advertised. It's coming up. And can you talk a little bit about that process of how that happened for you? Because I thought this was really interesting.
I never aspired to become the director of NCIS. I respected the position, of course. I don't know if it was I just never felt like I was worthy or capable, or that was probably part of it. But I just wanted to. I love being an NCIS agent. I think I could have been very happy in my career just being an agent throughout,
Sure.
because it's such fascinating work, and I think we lose that sometimes. Anyhow, I was working at headquarters, of course, as the executive director for counterterrorism, and I remember I was shocked to see that there was an advertisement. I mean, kind of thought it might be coming. It did. Had no intention of applying. The deputy director, one of the deputy directors at that point, Greg Scoville, approached me in the hall one evening and said, I want you to, I haven't seen you apply for the position of director. And that's why, I don't think I have a chance, and I'm not planning to do it. And he said, well, I want you to put in for it. And I said, well, Greg, I really, it's just going to be a wasted effort, and don't feel like I'm inclined to do it.
Yeah.
And he said, you don't understand. He says, and he was right. He said, it's not going to look good for us as an agency if there aren't a number of folks within the organization applying to become the director.
Sure.
So I said, all right, fair enough. I'll go into my office. And so I sat down on my computer and I did my best to put something together.
Yeah.
Right then and there, I just felt like, okay, I just want to satisfy this requirement and get it in the process. And I was just amazed to see that I actually proceeded. I really didn't think I had a chance. I thought there were plenty of other very qualified people in the running. One of whom was Mark Ridley, a colleague, a peer, a friend, a very capable man. And so, as the interviews went on, we went first to a panel, and then we had more individual interviews with the undersecretary and so forth. It became apparent that it looked like Mark and I were on the short list, Mark Ridley and I. And we had a chance meeting in the hall one day I'll never forget. And we both kind of looked at each other and realized we knew what each other were thinking. And I don't know who spoke first, but we both basically said, listen, no matter what happens, I've got your back. And that was a mutual agreement. I respect Mark deeply for that and for being my deputy. Ultimately, Secretary Mavis called me to his office, went in, sat down with him, Under Secretary Robert Work, and had a good conversation. They excused me from the office, called me back in a few minutes later and said, congratulations, you're the new director. And I was overwhelmed, very thankful.
Sure.
I was extremely proud to have been chosen for that. Honored, I should say, not proud, honored. And Secretary Mavis said, I'd like to know your thoughts on who you want to be the deputy. And without hesitation, I said, Mark Ridley. He has to be my deputy. And he said, well, okay then. He said, do you mind if I announce it? I'd rather you just keep that between us now, and then I'll announce that Mark Ridley's going to be your deputy. I said, yeah, that's fine with me. But Mark turned out to be just exactly what I'd hoped he would be, knew he would be. Just a great man, great character, full of integrity. And he had the intestinal fortitude and the backbone to stand up to me and say, boss, on occasion, you're just not, we're not seeing eye to eye.
Yeah.
And Mark and I would talk it through. And sometimes I agreed, you got the right idea, Mark, let's go your way. And then other times he would acquiesce and say, okay, boss, you called the color, let's do it.
Sure.
And he backed me 100% every time.
That's exactly what you should have. You should have people that can disagree with you at times and provide the case of why they feel so passionately about something. And you guys had that great relationship as deputy and director.
Yeah. And you're right. He was passionate, but he was also very respectful. And he would make a good argument. Mark is a smart man. And oftentimes he was absolutely right and I was wrong, and we had to march that way, and that's okay. But I knew he always had my back, and no matter what the decision was, we were in unison. Once the decision was made, we were together on that. So that just made life easy for me. We built a tremendous team there at headquarters, and it was what a way to end a career, right?
Sure. I mean, so let me ask you this: as far as when somebody comes in as the director of an organization, they always have a director's guidance to the field, to the agency in the field. Can you kind of talk about some of that process and how you came up with your director's guidance? Okay, let's deal with 11714, losing an analyst.
Okay, yeah, and as you know, we lost a brilliant analyst. Unfortunately, Colin Jones Hoffman was shot and killed in Hilla, Iraq, and what a talent he was. Young man who spoke multiple languages fluently, had served as an analyst at NCIS headquarters, and then also at the time was serving as an analyst for NAVCENT. And that hit us all pretty hard. We lost Colin. So,
we were very lucky during the Iraq War to only lose one individual. I mean, the Air Force lost several.
Absolutely.
USI agents. So
very fortunate.
Okay, now we'll deal with 12446 and why that were influential.
Yeah. So while working in Hawaii, one of the individuals I was very fortunate to work with again was Admiral Tim Keating. At this point, as I mentioned earlier, Admiral Keating and I had worked together in Bahrain. He was Fifth Fleet Commander, and now he was CINCPAC. So it's always good to have contacts at those high places that you know and have worked well together with. So that was a real joy for me to be able to work with Admiral Keating once again. Yeah, Lee, as I assumed the directorship, it was important for me to build on the great foundation that had already existed, right? I mean, all of us in leadership were standing on the shoulders of great people who preceded us. And it's our responsibility, of course, to that foundation all the stronger for those who would succeed us. My intent was to be able to move the organization from one major mission focus to another a little more seamlessly, if we could. You might recall, and I think we all do, the age of the spy, right? The decade of the spy. And then we had to shift into, I guess, maybe fraud was next. Big procurement fraud cases was another big shift. And then on to terrorism and so forth. All necessary. But those big shifts in mission focus come with a great expense, right? A lot of time, a lot of effort, money, personnel. You just, and I wanted to be to help us become a little more seamless in those shifts. And a big part of that was my intent to be engaged with the Pentagon more closely. So I knew what their strategy was going to be over the next 5 to 10 years, whether it be the procurement of a new series of weapon systems or more ships, or were we going to focus more against cybercrime, that sort of thing. If I knew where the Pentagon was going, then we could better position NCIS as a team and where we should be tooling up, if you will.
Sure.
Because it's a long process, right? I mean, if we know what the mission shift may be, not that we're going to give up anything, but just that we may have to focus more energy in one particular area. That starts with recruitment, because as we know, and as I've said before, our personnel are our greatest asset. So start with recruitment. Who do we need to recruit? What do they need to look like? Literally, sometimes. Are they going to, and then how do we vet those properly? Because as you know, towards the end, currently we have no problem getting plenty of applications. How do we vet them efficiently? And then train them, hire them, bring them on board, train them, and place them. And that all gets back to wanting to be able to match talent with task, put the right people in the right place at the right time for the required mission.
Sure.
And the more seamless we can be at that whole process, the better off we're going to be. And then finally, I agreed with the secretary that we would do our due diligence to make sure that all of our billets, wherever they were placed around the world, were filled and filled with the right people. And this got into the work that Mark Ridley and I did collaborate quite well together to, frankly, put some emphasis back on the mobility program. Sure. And make sure that, and all of our agents signed a mobility agreement. And I know it was tough for some to move. I feel bad that some families were uprooted from a place where they've become very comfortable and had established roots. Right. But in all fairness, not only to the other agents, but also to our mission, we realized we had to move folks around. And I know that caused a great deal of angst and so forth. I'm sorry for that, but it needed to be done.
Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah, one of the things that I wanted to do was to establish a code, basically, of our ethics, and that was I don't know if you remember IACT.
Sure.
The acronym: integrity, accountability, courage, and teamwork.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to enforce upon the organization that without integrity, everything else is lost. And that's something NCIS, let's look at the word veritas, which we brought back in. That was another thing I wanted to do.
Which I love.
Bring that back into our seal.
Yep.
Veritas, truth. Mm-hmm. Without that, the Navy and the Marine Corps are like, what good are you? If we can't trust everything you say to us 100%, you're no good. Yep. So integrity was absolutely the key. Well, to have integrity, you need to be willing to be held accountable. Sure. So we had to hold each other accountable. We had to hold ourselves accountable. Mm-hmm. We had to have the courage to say what was right, no matter what the circumstances or the evidence in a case produced, good or bad, whether it was in line with your theory or not, whether the Marine Corps or the Navy was going to like it or not. We had to print the truth, and we had to have the courage to say it in writing or otherwise.
Yep.
And then teamwork. Everybody knows I did not suffer prima donnas. I often told people, if you're trying to climb the ladder yourself at the expense of your peers, I'm going to find you another job.
Right.
That's not going to happen here. We all have to cover each other's back. So
Mm-hmm.
that's where the acronym IACT came from.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, again, I wanted to bring us back to recognizing what our core mission was. That was to support the Navy and the Marine Corps. We introduced the crimson in our seal and created a flag because I wanted those daily reminders of, it's not just Navy blue and gold. Yep. It's also the crimson of the Marine Corps. We are required. It's our charter to support them in every way, day and night, 24/7. And I want you to be reminded of that at all times. So those are some of the things. But again, I want to harken back to my experience in the Middle East. It became just so clear to me that we have some super tremendously talented people in NCIS. Mm-hmm. And we have to match that talent with the task. Mm-hmm. We have to be able to anticipate what that task is going to be, and we have to move quickly to get the talent to that task.
Sure.
That means moving people who may not want to be moved.
Right.
And this became one of the greatest challenges for Mark Ridley and I. But what greater resource do we have? Our greatest resource as NCIS is our personnel, our people. Mm-hmm. That's where our talent, that's where our gold is. And unless you can move that talent to the right place at the right time, you're not really giving the charter, our commission to the Marine Corps and the Navy, what it really requires. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the big strategic moves that we made, was to go back to remind people of the mobility agreement, the agent corps, I should say. Sure. The mobility agreement they signed when they first took the job and took the oath. And that mm-hmm. was, I will go wherever the NCIS requires my services.
Right.
And I know that it was very difficult for many families because they had unique circumstances, whether it be illness with a child or a spouse or whatever it might be. We tried to take that into consideration as best we could, but we also needed to be fair. The person who was 2-3 years in Djibouti deserved to come out of that difficult assignment. And we needed to find somebody else to go in there because there was still a mission that had to be accomplished. It was a challenge. I think most people rogered up and said, yeah, you're right. I signed the agreement and here I go. Give me my orders and I'm headed out. Sure. Others, of course, didn't take it so well. But that's part of leadership, right? You have to make those hard decisions and follow.
Well, that's what as I go back now, and I said, one person has to make those final decisions, and that was you. And that had to be difficult because of the relationships that you've had with people in the organization, and some of these people, and at the same time trying to be fair to everyone. Right. That difficult decision has to be made. Absolutely, yeah. Wow. But for the most, I just could not be more proud of our agent corps and our support personnel, all of the specialists, whether it be computer scientists or computer specialists, analysts, you name it, all the way down to the mail. One of the things I did as a director is I wandered the halls of RKB, first Building 111, but then RKB. Sure. I'll never forget the look on the ladies' faces in the mailroom the first time I showed up. But I wanted them to know they were important. They're part of it, right? Everybody, it's a huge machine made up of people, and every single aspect of that machine has to be cared for. And that, I think, is the other challenge of leadership. You can get focused myopically on the problem. I used to say, if you're not careful, you spend 80% of your effort working on 20% of the problem. Mm-hmm. You've got problem children. Sure, everybody's got problem children, but you can't spend 80% just focused on them. You've got to spend that 80% on the 80% of the organizations doing everything you ask them to do. Sure. So that
was, just one of my mandates is I wanted to touch base with every part of the organization I possibly could. And, you can't, but you have to at least give it an effort.
Sure. Well, I tell you, as I told you the other day, my experience when you were director was we were having troubles in Code 22 with the special warfare community. And I came up to your office one day because we had an admiral be calling in, and I wanted to warn you, give you a warning order that he's going to be calling in.
That's
And
right.
if you remember, and that was like the Roy Nedrow moment for you, as I observed how you handled the admiral that day. And it was kind of like, hey, this is the way it's going to be, admiral. You don't have those authorities. We have those authorities, and that's just the way it's going to be. And that's all it was to it.
No, that's right. And you may recall Mark Ridley was right there with it.
Right.
And thank you for the warning order. Appreciate that. You don't like surprises, and I appreciate the heads up on that. Yes, thank you.
Well, you had a great time, a great 3 years as director of the organization or so, and great experiences, tough experiences. I mean, you had some of the toughest challenges of any director I know has gone through it in my time as an agent in the organization. And so you retire, and this is something that's really fascinating to me, that you go off and you're now working for a human rights organization called International Justice Mission. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. Well, as you approach retirement, I knew there was going to be a time, and I started looking for jobs, and quite providentially, I think it was a God thing. I found this position with the International Justice Mission, and it was to lead an effort as the vice president for investigations and law enforcement development. Basically, IJM works throughout the world to recover, rescue, if you will, victims of slavery, child exploitation, and that sort of human trafficking. Great people, great organization. My responsibility was to train and guide the investigators of that organization throughout the world, and then also to help develop local law enforcement agencies to be able to do the same work, basically. Not unlike what NCIS did to a great extent in our overseas vaults and so forth. But it was very rewarding, but also very disturbing to see children of all ages, literally all ages, being sexually exploited, people of all ages being trafficked, working in ungodly conditions as slaves. I know some of our India offices at times would rescue as many as 500 victims of slavery, from brick kilns, fabric factories, rice mills, quarries. Yeah, one of the, just as an illustration of the type of work that we did at IJM and the human impact involved, one of our teams from the investigations and law enforcement development group went out to a rock quarry in India and took pictures and basically surveilled the operation to see how they would raid the rock quarry and rescue the victims of slavery. One of the images they picked up in a photograph was a young girl, 8 years old. She was barefoot, had a skirt on, bare-chested, and a hammer in her hand. Her job, from as long as she could hold a hammer, was to bang that hammer against large rocks and make small rocks, gravel, out of them. That's all she did. That was her. She no schooling. She ate, slept, and beat on rocks with a hammer. So the next day, our team went in and rescued her and her family and others from this rock quarry. And as they would do, they would take the victims off to a safe house and process paperwork and so forth, and work with local officials to get them reintegrated into society. And to keep the children busy, we would often give them a piece of paper and some crayons just to entertain them and keep them occupied.
Right.
We knew we had struck something when we saw this young girl peeling the paper off the crayon and then eating the crayon, because she had no idea what a crayon was.
Wow.
So, it just causes you to think back as an American what it must mean. I mean, what child at 8 years old doesn't know what a crayon is and would mistake it for candy? So these are the kind of conditions, these are the sort of things that sensitized me to the need to deal with human trafficking, rescuing slaves, rescuing children from being sexually exploited, and so forth.
Well, I saw the movie Sound of Freedom, and what an incredible movie. And the mission that you guys are doing there at IGM is just amazing, trying to save children, and just harkens back to the story of this child who doesn't know what a crayon's for, because her childhood has been stolen.
Stolen. That's a great way of putting it. Absolutely. And this, of course, led a colleague of mine and I to create a nonprofit called Prevention Now. We saw the horror of the slavery, the exploitation, and so forth, and we thought, rescue is necessary, it's critical, but how much better would it be if we could prevent this from ever happening in the first place?
Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
And well, God bless you guys for doing that. That is just amazing work. And I wish you all the success in the world in that.
Well, thanks, Lee. I appreciate that. God's been good to us, and I want to thank God for my career. I also want to thank my family. My wife was an outstanding part of our effort in serving NCIS, as you well know, and all of our personnel who've been transferred around the world multiple times. It's the family that gives you some sanity at the end of the day, and you know the sacrifices they're making, whether it's the children moving from school to school, or the spouse giving up a career, or all those things that are sacrifices by the family. Just want to put a thanks out to my family for all they did to support me throughout the career.
Well, the Clookie family has been involved with NIST for so long, and you have legacy even in today, working with NCIS, and she's a great agent too. So
thank you for saying
that. I was excited to have you on the show to talk about that. I have a great respect for the Clookie family, as you know, because I've worked with you guys since the day I was hired, pretty much. So it has been a wonderful experience being involved in knowing the Clookie family. I sure do appreciate you doing this podcast and this YouTube video on NCIS reports in the field.
Well, and thank you, Lee, for all that you do to keep us together as a family, an NCIS, ONI, NIS family. And please pass along my thanks to Kathy also, as she is a very unique legacy employee.
Yes, sir.
With her father, I believe, was the first to lose his life in the line of duty for NCIS, right?
Yes, sir. But I tell you, we both had a great career with NCIS, and we both started with NIS. So it's been a great year, 33 years now for me, just coming back as a new one and working with them. And it's been a pleasure to work for the current director, Omar Lopez, who is doing a fantastic job that all of you guys laid groundwork down to make his job easier, I think. So that's a kudos to all of the directors before.
That's right. And Director Lopez is doing the same for whoever will succeed him. And it just continues to build. And that's why we have such a great agency.
Well, Director, thank you so much for being on the show, and look forward to talking to you at the next NISA reunion, and also many times before. So great talking to you.
Thanks, Lee. Take care, brother.
All right, bye-bye.